Last few days, we've been looking at a way of seeing the issues we have, where you're not getting lost trying to figure out what the details. I talked about a way of looking at things where you're able to see the forest and you're not confused by trees, because that's essentially what all the conspiracy theories are about. And it's what the news is about, because the news is a conspiracy theory too these days. It's about creating confusion. It's about making the world look so complicated that there's no way to understand how it works, what's going on. It's crazy making. But once you figure out that, oh yeah, there's two ideas, and when these ideas affect an institution, that institution becomes a raging dumpster fire, and you have to get rid of it. And for those who don't remember, the two ideas in question are: there's justifications for violence outside of the strictest definition for self-defense, and you are allowed to declare law upon the unwilling. Like, if you think of these two ideas on their own, they make absolutely no sense. The person claiming these powers is obviously insane, and you are doubly insane if you claim these powers from being possessed by some external entity. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Yeah, what we can observe is that when institutions are struck by these two ideas, they become unusable. They cause more harm than they do good. And it's very difficult to figure out how the hell do we organize a society without these two unholy ideas, because there's no historical record of us ever doing it at any significant scale. If we want to get out of this mess, we're going to have to use some level of imagination. There's no recipe from the past that we can bring back and it's going to solve all our problems. Things in the past changed because they sucked. There was no magnificent, wonderful pastime where everything was great. There's no historical record. So we're going to have to figure it out. If you want to break it down into the basics, into the fundamentals, there's two things preventing us from taking care of ourselves instead of letting these institutions that are under the influence of these two unholy ideas do it for us. The first thing is that we have to become adults again. We're not even allowed to be adults anymore. An adult is somebody who is capable of addressing a punctual crisis situation and who is able to help others through a situation like that. You have to be an adult before you can be an effective parent, for instance, because that's what a parent is expected to do. But we're not allowed to become adults anymore. If something is wrong and you need it changed, your options as a human being over the age of 18 in a modern society are, pay somebody to do it, somebody who's got certifications and diplomas and permits and licenses and other such nonsense that contribute nothing to their ability to actually get the job done. Or you can beg. We've got a whole bunch of absolutely ineffective methods of begging that we've accumulated throughout the years. You have voting, protesting, petitions, all that stupid nonsense. It doesn't work, and it's not what adults do. You're an adult, something bugs you, you fix it. There's things we're missing to be adults. There's things that have been taken away from us in order to deprive us of the ability to become adults. And for that, I'm going to need a piece of paper because there's too much stuff on this subject for me to just read it out. Yeah, here we go. We've got our 8 disciplines of adulthood. 8 things that we need to be able to do to be effective as adults that we have lost the ability to do. That nobody is teaching us that anymore. And the first discipline is awareness. Because the first characteristic of a child, of a non-adult, the first thing that you notice that makes them ineffective is that they miss stuff. There's stuff they don't see, there's stuff they don't hear, there's stuff they don't notice. And past the point of noticing, there's things that they do not properly attribute meaning to. And it's the work we need to be doing with the discipline of awareness. We need to cultivate our ability to allow more information in, but we also have to increase our ability to interpret this information. And we need to be better at it under higher and higher levels of stress. Because remember, the whole point of an adult is that he is able to care for others in situations of crisis. So an adult needs to be able to understand what the hell is going on, obviously. The second discipline, absolutely critical, is the discipline of doubt. Everything you hold as knowledge, you need to doubt on a recurring basis. Doubt it, then doubt it again. We're not careful. We hoard stuff. We don't really know what... No, never trust. Brian Barr is asking, doubt, not trust? No, do not trust. Never trust. Trust is something that you do at a later stage, not based on trust, but of an understanding of risk-benefit. But no, the first thing you must do is doubt. Doubt first. Doubt always. Anything new that comes to your mind, doubt it. Anything old that you are using to reach a further conclusion, doubt it. Make sure that it fulfills the standards. Because they're standards. You've got to have standards. The next discipline are linked, but they're not the same. The third discipline is knowledge versus faith. There are things that we hold as true because they've satisfied some standards, some epistemological standards. We trust that it is true because it has been demonstrated. Either we have demonstrated it for ourselves, or people who have established trustworthiness and maintained through consistent action, maintained trustworthiness, have established something to be true. That's a thing that's gravely missing in the world today. Groups of people who can claim consistent rigor, consistent trustworthiness. Institutions have destroyed that. They have not allowed that to exist within themselves. And that gives us huge problems. Now we have to validate everything ourselves, and not everyone has the skills to validate everything. Nobody probably has the skills to validate everything to a very high degree of confidence. So this is very important stuff. We're slacking off on it. But of course, you have knowledge on one side and you've got faith on the other. We've talked about faith earlier. What is it? It's what we use instead of instinct, because instinct doesn't work in a world that we've changed faster than instinct can adapt to. So faith is a network of ideas that we use to lead us to outcomes that we prefer. In faith, we first determine what the outcomes we prefer are, what the outcomes we dislike are. And then we can have a mythology as to why that is, and a whole bunch of ethical structures to navigate manifesting that faith in a way that makes the world better. But there's a lot of things that we allow to remain in our stores of faith, in our pools of faith, that don't make the world better, that deteriorate our outcomes, that deteriorate the outcomes of others around us. And it's important to inventory and be very, very diligent in knowing what we know, to what level of confidence we know it, what we believe, what our faith is, and how confident we are that these elements of faith are leading us to behaviors and viewpoints that make our experience of life better and make the experience of life of the people around us better too. Fourth discipline is going to be kindness. because that's a difficult one. Because, see, there's things about this stuff that the concepts are so large that it's difficult to wrap your head around it in a way that puts it into the words. But when you're talking about kindness, what you're talking about is love in the spiritual sense. And it comes under two forms. It comes in two flavors. And the first one is nurture. When you manifest love through nurturing, you are doing things that restore people to what they were before they were diminished by exhaustion or injury. You have a difficult day at work, you come home and you are in a reduced state. Not catastrophically so, but somewhat reduced. Other people manifesting nurturing towards you, or you using self-care methods that nurture you, will bring you back to what you were before you were diminished. And then you have challenge, which is the other flavor of love in the spiritual sense. Challenge is made up out of all the things that take a person and grow him into more than he or she previously was. Here's the thing. It's best to default to nurture, because you can absolutely, you can hurt people who need to be challenged by nurturing them and not challenging them as they need. But it takes time for that harm to manifest. You're not going to immediately hurt someone by nurturing them when they needed to be challenged. The opposite is not true. If you are challenging to someone who needs nurturing, you are hurting that person immediately. There's another aspect to the discipline of kindness, and it comes back to the idea that all humans are living beings, and living beings only ever do one thing, and that thing is try to adapt to their environment as best they can. Then when you understand this, that there's no more bad people. There's people who live in environments that are beyond their ability to cope, and there's people who have defective adaptation strategies. When you accept this, you're no longer looking for people to hurt as a way to solve problems. When there's a conflict, there's two sides made out of people who need help, period. We have to get out of that mentality of, if we hurt the right people, we're going to fix this. We're not. It's not going to work. It never has, right? But further than that, you have other elements to this. We all make mistakes. We all fail to uphold the standards we would wish to uphold. What's our go-to recipe when we fail? We experience guilt and shame. We beat ourselves up. Does it work? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It contributes nothing to your ability to become a better person to experience guilt or shame. If anything, it makes it more difficult, because now you've got all these distracting feelings. Skip it. Skip the guilt. Skip the shame. Go straight to, hey, that's interesting. What happened? How do I prevent this from happening again? How did I allow myself to be pulled outside of the box in which I am a good person? Because nobody's a good person in general. We're all good inside a box. There's a box inside of which we can be good. Inside that box, our stress levels are low enough and we are able to interpret things coherently. We are not in this perpetual stop the hurt mode. That's when we fail. We fail when we're trying to stop something from hurting. And there's two things we need to do. We need to work actively at making that box bigger and bigger and bigger. And we need to work actively at holding ourselves more in the center of this box, so that when things get shaken around, I'm not knocked out of the box in which I'm a good person. That's how you become better, not by feeling bad about the bad things you've done. Understand the mechanism that leads you to doing bad things, and then you become a better person. The fifth discipline is communication. People are terrible at communicating. They're genuinely dismal at it. that's because of what a conversation is for most people. What a conversation is for most people is the other person says something. It affects me emotionally. I pay attention to the emotional effect the words of the other person has had. Now I will say words that will soothe my emotional state out loud. The other person hears these words, listens to how these words affected them emotionally, and then says words out loud to soothe that emotional reaction. That is not functional communication. That is not how adults communicate. Somebody says something, they are telling you about themselves. You need to listen to the discipline of awareness. It comes back to that. You need to pay attention to what the other person is telling you about yourself. Your emotional reaction is telling you about you. It's interesting too. It's useful information too. But it is not useful necessarily to the conversation. After having learned about the other person through their words, then you're going to answer something to hopefully affect them, to move them in some direction. And we're having a conversation. We're trying to move our faith and belief systems into different directions. That's how adults communicate. And you have to work at it. You have to be disciplined. You have to do it actively. The sixth discipline is forethought. And most people, they don't think past the end of the thing they're going to do. They have a problem. They see a solution. They don't go past the point where their problem is solved. Your actions are going to have consequences. These consequences are going to have implications. An adult understands that I'm thirsty, I'm going to go get myself some water, doesn't end with you having drank a glass of water. There's a whole bunch of things that are associated to that. Is the water coming from a bottle that needs to be refilled for others to be able to enjoy it? Is most of the drinking going to be done outside? And now you've got a container made out of glass that you can't really do anything with. And you have to think past. And a lot of the trouble we get ourselves into comes from lacking forethought. We knew A would cause B, and we wanted B. But we didn't think that B would cause C, and C would cause D, and so on. And a whole bunch of people are going to be affected. You can't be an adult without forethought. It's an indispensable characteristic. Again, you need to train that. You need to practice it. If you're not actively working on it, you are actively working on being a child. Seventh discipline is action. It's the one I have the most difficulty with. It's the ability to convert these large, if we do this and this and this, we're going to fix the problem, and convert them into physical impact on the world. And if we don't have that, if we don't transition to this, we're wasting everybody's time. We have to have the ability to move to action. And I know, it's the most difficult thing among these. And I know that there's a whole bunch of different specific ways in which I fail at the discipline of action a lot. And every time I understand a new way in which it happens, I become more effective. It's great stuff. And the final discipline is the thing that brings it all together. It's the discipline of integrity. And the discipline of integrity is really, really critical, because it's that time of the day when we look at all that we've done and evaluate if we've upheld our ethics through it. I was striving for greater awareness. Did I succeed? Or did I find a way to pretend I was doing it? Discipline of faith and belief. Same thing. Was I really doing it, or was I fooling myself into pretending? Was I taking shortcuts? Did my actions have the desired outcome? Ultimately, you do everything right. You try to do everything right. If the results aren't what you wanted, you failed. And you need to be honest about that, to continuously strive to improve your ability to do these things. But yeah, the discipline of integrity is that final bullshit check that you do on that whole stack of work. So that's the first thing. We're not taking a step out of the mess we are in if we don't turn ourselves into adults. That's the first thing, right off the bat. Everybody's stuck here until we start working on this. Now, the second thing that needs to be urgently done is the intermediation. Because while the institutions that currently ruin our lives exist through our faith, their power rests on the physical reality of intermediation. They currently have the ability to fulfill needs that we do not have the ability to fulfill ourselves. And until we have recovered this ability to do the things for ourselves, we are not getting out of this prison. We are not getting out of this cage. We'll just die outside because that's the way it's rigged. It's a prison with all the stuff we need to live locked inside. If you're disobedient, they kick you out and you die. That's how it works. So until we recover these abilities, the entire pipeline for food no longer requires money. We have a food pipeline that no longer requires money because that's how you know something's intermediated. You need money to get it. Money is the language of intermediation. Money is the hydraulic fluid of intermediation. It's its only purpose. It's the only thing it does properly. And as long as you need money for one of the steps that is linked to a category of products, let's say food, as long as there's something in the chain of making food available to humans that requires money, food is intermediated. And it is externally controlled and dominated, and we are slaves because of it. So we need to develop that ability to do things for ourselves. We need machine shops in every neighborhood. We need a fractal economy where as much as possible at every scale from the individual to the global, the group has at its disposal the abilities of all individuals, and every individual in every subgroup has the abilities present in the whole, in the entire global community. That's the ideal model. That is the model that provides the greatest amount of diversity in offering, as well as the greatest amount of resilience structurally. Because disasters are not something we should be surprised by. Disasters happen. Pandemics like this are going to happen. This is probably a 1 in 80, 90 year thing. 80, 90 years is short. Pandemics is something we need to expect happening on a regular basis. Why is this one so much worse than it needs to be? Because we have fully intermediated economic system that are hyper dependent on long range transportation. Because everything comes from far away, you've got people with the germs of everywhere in every other place. And that's how you get maximally accelerated, maximally serious epidemics that propagate super fast and are very difficult to control. If instead you had 50% of what people need comes from the 150 people living closest to them. 25% of what's left comes from the 22,000 people living around them closest. And 12.5% comes from the closest 3 million people. And only 12.5% is from some sort of global trade. If we lived like this, first of all, 150 people, that's Dunbar's number. If you have your basic unit of community described as 150 people, people are going to identify this as natural human organizations, and that their behavior is going to be functional. A lot of the rules we have in our societies exist to compensate for the dysfunctions people develop living and functioning in groups that are too large. If your first bubble is 150 people and 150 times 150, that's about 22,000. So you can have work groups of 150 people working on different things that require a larger scale of work that aren't worth doing at the very, very individual level. And for certain things that are very, very complex, possibly things like semiconductor manufacturing, then, 150 times 22,000, it's about 3 million. So you can have these three levels of more or less organized structures. But the idea is to keep things as close as possible to the people. You still have trade. You still have that 12.5% of stuff that comes from global trade. Truffles don't live everywhere. French wine doesn't come from places other than France. Fish sauce from that island in Vietnam only comes from there. There's only a few places in the world where you still have healthy rubber trees. You're still going to have some level of global interaction. But if you can reduce that, or even if you don't reduce that, but you have the capability to bring these capabilities back to the local level, then you can have scalable shutdowns to restrict the propagation of epidemics that are minimally disruptive on people, yet highly effective. The intermediation is not just for human dignity. It's also for human survival. We understand intermediation to be an attack on our dignity because we understand it to be an attack on what we need to be to have an expectation of surviving any significant amount of disruption.